Hi, and welcome to InstaVision with Glenn Reynolds. That's me. Today it's something a little different. Instead of politics, we're going to talk about science fiction, and well, there may be some overlap in terms of disasters on both ends, but I think it'll be kind of edifying. I'm joined today by John Ringo, a man who made a midlife career change and went from being a database manager to being a New York Times best-selling science fiction writer, and the author of such books as A Hymn Before Battle, Paladin of Shadows, Princess of Wands, and most recently, The Last Centurion. His website is at johnringo.com, and all of his stuff is, of course, available via amazon.com and in fine bookstores everywhere. And I'm happy to have him here in the studio with me now. And as you can see, we're not in Knoxville. We've actually got a different location. So it's great to have you here. So thanks for joining me.
Pleasure to be here.
Well, it's kind of an interesting story. You actually were working as a database manager, and I guess reasonably happy with your work, and then you started writing and had to overcome a little bit of rejection, didn't you, before you sort of made it big?
Well, yeah, actually, Hymn Before Battle got rejected by Bain, but at that point I had developed a relationship online with Jim Bain back when he was alive, and he was very, very active early in the internet. Bain's Bar was one of the first web forums ever, and I'd developed a relationship with him, and at one point I'd mentioned that I was writing, and he actually emailed me a week after I'd gotten my rejection letter and said, "Nobody can find your book." So I sent him a really apologetic letter saying, it got rejected. I can understand if you don't want to override your first reader. I want to modify it some. And I didn't understand Jim Bain. After he read it, he fired the first reader.
Oh, so that's like every author's fantasy, right?
A little bit. It was a little unusual situation, but I think that the results have justified Jim's vision, if you will. 32 novels, 9 years, 5 New York Times extended list bestsellers. As a matter of fact, the last one that actually came out was Eye of the Storm, which restarted sort of the Postlin universe and went to number 32 on the New York Times list. So, not bad.
No, not bad at all. I think an awful lot of authors would like to enjoy that kind of success. So, The Last Centurion, which I actually got a lot of interest on my blog, and that's kind of I guess that's not really science fiction, or it's not...
Technically, it's science fiction.
Okay.
Because it's science, well, it's fiction.
Right.
It deals not with current day, but with near future. And it is heavily science-based.
That's true.
And it's technically military or military political science fiction due to all of the stuff. Really, it's just a blog. It was the weirdest freaking book. It really felt like it was dictation from the future.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. Oh, very much.
I don't want that. That's not the future I want.
March 2007, I'd been working on other stuff. I'd kind of lost the Jones for the other stuff. I started thinking about this thing. I sat down, 9 days, 153,000 words. And it was like it was dictation. I was just no eat, no sleep, just writing for 9 days. And then going back and editing and checking the data and sending it out to scientists that I knew to, modify some of the stuff and explain some of the stuff. Expand it a little bit.
For viewers out there who haven't read the book and don't know the story, it's set in the very near future, and a number of fairly ridiculous, unlikely things that nobody would expect happen. The climate gets cooler.
The election of a Democratic president.
Right. There's a Democratic president. That's right. Although it looks more like a Secretary of State.
The one prediction that I got wrong. The one prediction, but Obama was nowhere on the radar screen at that point. Nowhere. Okay?
And then also we have an outbreak of pandemic flu.
Yeah. It was a solar minimum.
Right.
Which is no sunspots.
Luckily, no danger of that. Which
led to global cooling.
Right.
And an outbreak of human-to-human transmissible avian flu. But it was written in March 2007. At the time, the science said that human-to-human transmissibility would be extremely difficult with avian flu. Well, since then, there's been human-to-human transmissibility. We've got swine flu. At the time, there was no indication that solar cycle 24 would be low. None whatsoever. Solar cycle 24 is flat still.
What are we, like 38 days without a sunspot now, I think, or something like that?
Oh, it's not so much that it's 38 days without a sunspot. It's that it's 38 days without a sunspot, and prior to that sunspot, it was 138 days without a sunspot. The sun has essentially turned off its solar wind, and we're starting to see some of the effects. They're seeing the effects in the southern climes more than in the northern.
Well, you know, it's funny. I've got tomato plants, and I got enough tomatoes out of one plant last year to feed us all and have some left over. I've got 4 now, and they're just beginning to bear now. We haven't broken 90 all summer.
And last year, well, we sure have in Chattanooga. Last year, national grains productions were down 17% yield.
I didn't realize that.
Oh yeah, 17%, and that was the first year of the minimum. As the minimum goes on, you know, I'm not gonna sit here and say that the sky is falling or anything like that, but it's gonna have a really interesting and potentially very nasty, not as nasty as the book, effect.
Well, let's hope not. Yeah, I just remember I posted something on my blog a while back about the sunspot cycle and the cooler climate. You actually emailed me and said, you know, this is beginning to give me a bad feeling.
Oh, I wrote the book. I went, and I've written a lot of stuff about horrible things happening. I mean, I've wiped out the human race multiple times. But I wrote the book, and then as the book is being, you know, released, the science starts falling into place, and the events start falling into place. And I'm sitting here and I'm going, oh, please don't let this have a, you know, when the swine flu broke out, I had one guy email me and he goes, "Can you also heal the sick?" And I'm like, I do not want to live in the world of the last centurion. I so don't. I mean, that's one of the nightmares for authors like me, that they'll get stuck in one of their worlds.
Oh yeah, you don't want that. Actually, none of your books are that good, you know. Now, when the Poseline were invading Earth and eating everybody, they were like building nuclear cannon at the University of Tennessee.
Yeah, and they had just up the road. They was where they had the antimatter production facility and kept blowing up mountains. Yeah,
I hate it when that happens. Yeah, so
then there was the dream that came in near Oak Ridge, so we dropped the nukes on them, and they were able to watch the. Everybody at Oak Ridge was able to get out there with their glasses and watch.
So if people read your book, do you think it's any kind of a eye-opener for anybody? Do you think it's going to encourage anybody to actually do any preparation for not necessarily the scenario in the book, but for
the Last Centurion
food shortages and illness and stuff like that?
The Last Centurion is less about disaster than, if you think about it, the philosophical underpinnings of what makes America America. And what makes America, I'm an American exceptionalist. I don't think that America will exist forever. Civilizations rise and fall. But just as if I had been a Roman, I would have been a Roman exceptionalist. I would like to think that if I was a Greek during the Roman periods, when Rome was expanding into mass empire, I would have been a Roman exceptionalist, because I could see the weight of history. That's why I'm an American exceptionalist. Lived all over the world, or at least traveled all over the world, and lived in a lot of it. And you know, even taking a close look at the cultures and the countries and everything else, I remain an American exceptionalist. And Last Centurion is about what makes America exceptional, what makes America less exceptional, and what some of the issues are with or without a disaster. The other novel that I wrote, which now is beginning to appear prescient, did you ever read Road to Damascus? With Linda Evans, the one about the bolo?
No, yes, I did. I sure did. That's right.
Go back and take another look at it.
In fact, I was thinking of that book the other day because Ken Anderson, who's a law professor, who's very interested in the ethics of military robots, has been after me to write an article with him on that. And I was actually thinking of that book the other day, thinking, oh, I need to read that again. But yeah.
That one was less about the ethics of Sonny than it was about constitutionalist, rule of law, relatively libertarian society, and the road that it took sliding into the abyss of tyranny under a socialist government, which of course, if you ask any modern liberal or Acorn member, could never happen in the United States.
Do they really think that, or they just think it wouldn't be so bad if it did?
Oh no, well, it depends. It depends. The fellow travelers, the useful idiots, as Lenin puts it, think that could never happen. Because socialism simply isn't like that. It's for the good of the people, and everyone does well. Whereas the people who are hardcore about it are like, oh yeah, that's the whole point, for the elites to be in charge and to tell people what to do.
Have you noticed the more people talk about equality enforced by society, the more you wind up with a system where you've got a bunch of insiders who get all the goodies?
Yeah.
Well, you're probably best known for military science fiction, though you certainly write a lot of other kinds of things, all the way to fantasy and, techno-thriller science fiction like Last Centurion, I guess, is sort of... If Tom Clancy wrote The Last Centurion, people wouldn't think of it as science fiction, right? I mean,
yeah, Tom Clancy was fortunate in that he came in on the fiction side through the Naval Press Institute, because otherwise everything that Clancy writes is science fiction.
So if you look at what sells in science fiction, military science fiction is really one of the biggest things, but my sense is that a lot of people in sort of the science fiction establishment don't value it as much. In fact, one of your novels, you kind of make that point.
Back when I used to do USENet, in the Troll Wars days, there was a thread on USENet how John Ringo is single-handedly destroying science fiction.
Wow.
Single-handedly.
That's really amazing.
Single-handed. I was like, it doesn't matter what you do single-handedly to destroy something, something that large. I mean, if I single-handedly destroyed the Earth, I'd still have to kind of go,
right.
Good for me. And the reason
maybe
for
a super villain, but at least I'm super, right?
At least I'm super. But the reason for it was a guy who worked in the world's largest bookstore in Toronto, and they'd gotten in these cases and cases of books for the Christmas season, and there were these cases and cases of John Ringo novels, and like 5 Larry Nivens, and 2, trying to think of, is it Ian McNeill or whatever it is, the Scottish, and all of the good science fiction there was hardly any of, but there was all these John Ringo novels and David Weber novels and David Drake novels and all this pulp. Can I use the C word?
Sure.
All this pulp crap, And therefore, military science fiction was single-handedly destroying science fiction. And I'm sitting here and I'm going, yeah, well, I'll take that to the bank. Military science fiction for me, or at least militarist science fiction for me, space opera, was the gateway drug for a career of reading science fiction, and now writing science fiction and other stuff. So, however you get kids to read, it's good.
Yeah.
If you can get them off of Halo for just a little while, if you can get them out of Grand Theft Auto for just a little while and get them to crack a book, it doesn't matter what.
I think that's really true. Now, a lot of people would say military science fiction started, really, well, not maybe started, but got kicked off in a big way with Robert Heinlein's Starship Troopers, which produced a truly lousy movie.
Execrable.
I think we have a little footage of that movie. Can we see what they did to Starship Troopers here?
Yes, the bugs that shoot plasma out of their butts. Now, what's really fascinating about this is that space is very, very, very large, and all of those ships would actually be barely in sight of each other. They would be spread out so widely, and the plasma that they shoot out of their butts can't track, so it would be going through empty space. Yeah, I mean, we're talking about orbital velocities here. Those ships would be so far apart, there's no way they'd ram each other.
Oh, but you got Denise Richards, so, you got to give them something here.
Yeah.
But yeah, the thing about this movie that struck me was
and by the way, the speed here, you wouldn't actually be able to see it. It'd just be blurs.
I love it.
I've come to just really hate people who think they can do science fiction. I'm watching a TV show or a movie or something like that, and it'll be, science fiction, and it's obviously written. Science fiction authors can go from science fiction to fiction. They can go from science fiction to romance. They can go from science fiction to freaking westerns. Going into science fiction, very, very tough. You have to have this enormously broad knowledge of science, among other things.
Yeah, that's hard.
Oops.
They didn't teach that when I was an English major, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so what's your next project? Now, you said you were getting interested in apocalyptic fiction. Is that right?
Well, everybody, I feel like if I wrote, and I'm going to write the apocalyptic because it's so stuck in my brain, I've got to write it to get it out. But what's more interesting to me right now is that everybody's doing apocalyptics. John Birmingham's Without Warning, the Forstchen, what was it, 1 second after.
1 second after. Steve Sterling's Change
series. Dies the Fire, Change series, which admittedly started a while back. But suddenly you're starting to see, I saw one in the bookstore the other day, I don't even remember who it was, but you're starting to see all these apocalyptics coming out. The last time I can remember a period where there were a lot of apocalyptics was the 1970s related to thermonuclear war. What's interesting about it is that we're dealing with some similar economic conditions. Have you ever heard the thing about when the economy goes down, hemlines go up? You know you're in a recession when brown dye hits a certain sales rate, things like that. Yeah. I think apocalyptics and recessions go together.
Yeah, everything sucks, but we'll check it all.
Yeah, might as well check it all.
Well, when Jimmy Carter was president and disco ruled, you could see why the end of the world didn't seem so bad. Yeah,
Just blow it all up. Reagan's, ladies and gentlemen, just like to announce that I've declared war on the Soviet Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. The bombs go off in 5 minutes.
That's right. That's right.
Have a nice day. Mr. President, I think we're alive.
Oops.
Oops.
Oops. I've heard theories that he did that on purpose to mess with their minds. I don't know if that's true.
God, yeah. Oh, God. He loved to mess with Gorbachev.
He was more like that Phil Hartman sketch. Did you see the Phil Hartman sketch on Saturday Night Live?
Yes, I did.
That was actually more like reality.
At the time, I went, they think that this is funny. Because I was a real, I was a Reagan warrior, but I was a real student of Reagan. And man, he was an actor. And he played the big dumb cowboy really, really well. And you go back and you read his writings afterwards and his letters, especially the book that came out, which was the original drafts of his Sunday rebuttal speeches, where there's references to Aristotle, there's references to all sorts of philosophical issues and economic history and military history, and he's sitting there and he's scratching it all out and putting in Churchillian guttural Anglo-Saxon words for everything, and therefore everybody thought that he was an idiot.
Oh, well, that's sometimes the secret, is to tune your message to the audience. Now, your next book is Live Free or Die, is that right?
Yeah, well, obviously I'm a big liberal. I actually have not seen the cover. I've been offline so much. I haven't seen the cover. Oh my God, he did a great job.
See, we have all the resources at PJTV. We get the inside stuff before the authors do. Yeah, how do we do it? Well, before we go, any recommendations on what people should be reading besides, obviously, 32 John Ringo books? That should keep them busy for a week or two. But
what people should be reading? Gibbon's Rise and Fall of the Roman Empire comes to mind.
It's more timely every day. I don't know.
Yeah, a little bit. Farewell to Alms by John Caldwell.
Oh,
yeah. That is very interesting reading, especially if you go beyond the basic reality of the premise, which is that modern industrial society derived from fast evolution, to the question of what happens if the technology has started to reverse that. And instead of us being well adjusted for that environment, our adjustment to it is starting to go out. There's a lot of interesting stuff to read right now. There's some fascinating science being done. People are actually, despite the political correctness that you find throughout the psychological and medical and anthropological environments, there's starting to be capabilities for science to be able to study things to such an extent that after a while you can't say, well, we don't like that. You get to a certain point where you go, we don't like the conclusions that we've come to, but these are the conclusions. So there's some fascinating conclusions starting to come out about what makes us human, what makes us the rising ape meeting the falling angel, in neurology, in anthropology, in ethnology, in physiology. And that is kind of fascinating.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to join us here.
Thank you.
I've been with John Ringo, author of The Last Centurion and a whole bunch of other science fiction books, including coming up soon, Live Free or Die. On InstaVision here on PJTV, I'm Glenn Reynolds, and we'll see you again next week. Thank you.